Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are and whatever you're doing. I hope you're having a fantastic day. In this video, I'll be covering the absolute best dexterity weapons in the game that you should grab to ensure you have the best chance of surviving the brutal challenges and enemies lying in wait for us when the Elden Ring DLC finally rears its beautiful but terrifying head. If you haven't seen them already, we have already covered Arcane, Faith, and Strength, so make sure you go check them out as well. Links to them will be down below. With the strength weapons, there was a very clear few winners of the absolute best weapons on the list, which is why I saved them to the end. However, with the dexterity weapons, pretty much every single one is absolutely god tier. So I've done this list in a slightly different order. I will be showing you the 6 top weapons that have interchangeable Ashes of War and can be buffed with magic and consumables first, and round it off with 4 more weapons whose Ashes of War cannot be changed and they cannot be buffed with magic and consumables, but the base weapons are so insanely powerful that they are equally worth, if not more worthy, of you grabbing them during your playthrough. So we'll jump straight into it and start off with a nice and quick one because I have already done an entire video covering this weapon in its own build because it is that good, and that is the Guardian's Sword Spear. All you need to know for this video is when you apply the keen scaling, it is an absolute powerhouse. It says it only has an A scaling, but it actually scales better than most weapons that have an S scaling in dexterity. You can acquire this from farming any of the Erdtree Guardians. My personal recommendation, and where I got 2 of them, is at the Minor Erdtree Church in the Lanedale outskirts. There are 6 Guardians patrolling around, and it's very quick and easy to farm them until you get this halberd. Please note though, its power actually shines most when you're just using one of them. The moveset when wielding just one of these is significantly quicker than a standard halberd moveset, even though it does share the same moveset as any standard halberd. However, if you power stance 2 of them, they then move just as slow as dual wielding regular halberds. So ideally using one with either a seal or a shield in your offhand is going to be perfect for this weapon. I've already rambled on with this one more than I was going to because I love it so much. So let's leave it there and move on to number 2, the Cross Naginata. This one is probably the weakest on the list and just barely made it in, but due to how incredibly fashionable and unique it is, I really wanted to share this one with you. It has a completely unique moveset, mixing in both thrusting and slashing attacks, and looks awesome when you two-hand it. It inherently causes blood loss, and as I mentioned at the start of the video, this weapon can be infused with Ashes of War, so you can really tailor this to any build whatsoever that you are running. It is also found reasonably early on in the Gale Tunnel. Specifically, it's found on a corpse inside a cavern with the giant land octopus hanging overhead. And it has inherent blood loss build-up, meaning you can pair it with something like frost or poison to make it even more devastating. Next up, we have the weapon that I think is going to surprise most people, but bear with me as I explain exactly why the Flamberg is on this list. As with all of the early weapons on this list that you are able to infuse with Ashes of War, give this the keen scaling and give it wild strikes. With keen scaling, it becomes a surprisingly good dexterity scaling weapon, and actually has one of the best dexterity scalings in the game. Then all we need to do is combat the fact that this is the only slow weapon on this list. Hence, we give it Wild Strikes. Wild Strikes hits very, very fast, whilst still making use of its really high base attack power. With this weapon and this build, you really can have your cake and eat it. You can have the power of a strength weapon and the speed of a dex weapon all rolled into one. I personally think it's also a very cool looking weapon. Again, it has inherent blood loss build-up, and it's found pretty early on in the game, atop one of the ramparts in the Red Main Castle, guarded by a pumpkinhead. And at this point, I should mention, as with all of the previous videos in this series, we are purely looking at weapons that do not have any magical capabilities inherently built into them. Therefore, we are going to omit anything like the Moonveil or the Wing of Astal. Yes, they have really good dex scaling and they do work fantastically with dex builds, but I'll be covering them in the magic builds because they are magical weapons. Next up on the list, we have most people's favourite, even though it has been nerfed again and again, and that, of course, is the Scavenger's Curved Sword. This weapon really isn't as good anymore as people keep trying to convince themselves that it is. And don't worry, that's not me being a naysayer. I made a video explaining exactly how powerful this weapon is, but it has been nerfed significantly since then, and there are now way better choices. Especially because for this to work, you need to have done 2 full playthroughs, because one of these swords by itself really just doesn't hold up. You need to be able to power stance it, both of them with the Seppuku Ash of War and the Occult Affinity. It's a very specific, very late game build, and very hard to get together. If you can combine all these components, it is amazing, as you can see here. But there are just as powerful, far easier options to obtain. I kept it on this list because I know I would have been crucified if I didn't mention it. It is still a great weapon, but trust me, there are now better options. And super quickly, before I move on from it, this is found in Mount Gelmir on a corpse just as you're ambushed by the Grafted Scion on your way to the top of the mountain. We will now round out the bottom half of the list with the Godskin Peeler. I'll come onto that in just a second, and then we will move on to the top 5 dexterity weapons in the game. But just super quickly before we talk about the Godskin Peeler, I wanted to give a massive shout out and thank you to all of our patrons. You are all wonderful, amazing people. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your continued support. More awesome, juicy rewards are on the way. I love you all. And now let's get back to the video. Where the Godskin Peeler really excels is if you spec this into Blood Affinity. With high arcane as well, it will apply insane amounts of bleed build-up very, very quickly. And dual wielding them, you can use them in a very similar way to the Scavenger's Curved Sword. However, we're not here to talk about putting arcane on it and using bleed. Let's look at the weapon as is. With the Keen Affinity, it has very decent dexterity scaling, and it has an inherent, very, very awesome skill, the Black Flame Tornado. There is a way to acquire this skill separately by defeating the Godskin Duo boss near the end of the game, but if you want to grab the skill early, getting this weapon is the only way to do so. It is dropped by the Godskin Apostle at the end of the Windmill Village, and the Black Flame Tornado is incredible. This ability deals percentage health damage, meaning something could have 100 health or 100 million health, and it would kill them both in roughly the same amount of time. That is why this weapon, and specifically its weapon art, is incredibly good on big, beefy bosses. This weapon can be fantastic against the Fire Giant if it aligns with your build and you have no other options, especially on New Game Plus 3, 4, 5, etc. It's also a cool looking weapon and has a unique R2 and running R2 moveset. And finally, as I said at the start of this video, this is the second last weapon that we'll be reviewing on this list that can be infused with different Ashes of War and buffed with magic and consumables. So it's very tailorable. Tailorable? Is that a word? Anyway, it is now. It's very tailorable to whatever build it is you decide to use. Now, we will move on to one of my personal favorites on this list, the Nagakiba. This weapon is just so insanely long. There are a few different ways to acquire it. If you are willing to be an evil bastard, you can kill Bloody Finger Hunter Yura at the start of the game to acquire the Nagakiba, or you will need to complete his questline. One of the reasons I love it so much and that it made it onto this list is its incredible length. It is insane. Also, it's another weapon that has inherent blood loss, and it has a unique heavy thrusting attack which takes advantage of its insane range. When you acquire this, it will come equipped with the Piercing Fang Ash of War. However, did you know that's not actually its default Ash of War? Just like the Uchigatana, its default Ash of War is Unsheath, and you can remove this for its default skill Unsheath. However, as you see here, I've actually applied Double Slash because I think it's incredibly cool and works really, really well with this weapon. As with all katanas, it's got insane attack speed, and when you apply the Keen Affinity, its scaling and its raw damage output are absolutely insane. Combine the long reach, the attack speed, and the fact that you can use pretty much any Ash of War on it makes it super versatile and applicable for any build and facing any enemy. This truly is a god tier weapon. We are getting into the very, very juicy weapons in this video now, and dexterity weapons you definitely do not want to miss. We'll now move on to the final 4. They're not the top 4, as I say, these are just the 4 weapons that have Ashes of War that can't be changed, which makes them a lot more niche and unique than the other weapons on this list that we have reviewed. So we'll start out this final 4 with the Scorpion Stinger. Now, please excuse the footage, because I am no good at using daggers. I have never used them, and I have no idea how they're effective. On paper, the Scorpion Stinger is absolutely insane, and trust me, if this is the kind of build that you run, I'm sure you will utilize this way better than me, and your fights will look way cleaner than this. But even with my dumbass using this weapon and failing to use daggers miserably, you can still see the power that this weapon has. I am currently dual wielding this along with the Misericord. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, just because they're both 2 solid daggers, and I love the power stance move set of daggers. But ideally, if you dual wield 2 Scorpion Stingers, you will get way more damage output. The scaling and the base damage of this dagger far exceeds that of any other dagger in the game, and it's one of the very few weapons that has inherent Scarlet Rot buildup. So if you're dual wielding 2 of these, any enemy that is susceptible to Scarlet Rot is gonna die very, very fast. The Scorpion Stinger is found right at the end of the Lake of Rot, just before you go through into the next area. It is in a chest right at the end of the area. And one more thing to note, even if you haven't been blown away by this weapon, or indeed any dagger prior to seeing this video, please also note that as of the most recent patch, which as of recording is patch 1.08, the speed and distance of most of its attacks have been increased, and the recovery time between attacks has been reduced. So it is now faster, more powerful, and longer reaching than ever. Now let's wrap up with some absolutely amazing weapons. Next up is the Bloodhound's Fang. I did not realize the power of this weapon until I started researching it and using it for the purposes of this video. In fact, I didn't even know that you could follow up the Ash of War with an additional heavy attack input to do this awesome invisible dash slash. It is the most satisfying thing in the world to use. And when you're invisible, yes, you have iframes and you will teleport through enemies' attacks. You feel and look like a badass, and it does just crazy amounts of damage. I see why speedrunners are using this on various different Elden Ring speedrunning categories at the moment. It is just ridiculous. I have nothing bad to say about this weapon. This is another weapon that has blood loss buildup, and for such a powerful weapon, it has incredibly low stat requirements with 18 strength and 17 dex, but even then the 18 strength can be lowered to 12 if you two-hand it, and it is dropped by one of the first bosses in the game, Bloodhound Knight Darrowil in the Everjail in Limgrave. And on top of that, if you're struggling with him, just progress the very first part of Blythe and Carle's questlines and you can summon Blythe to come and help you kill him. So you can very easily get this ridiculously broken weapon super early on in the game. It has one of the coolest weapon skills, it's crazy powerful. I have nothing but good things to say about this absolutely awesome weapon. We're now on to the final 2. We have one more melee weapon and then a ranged weapon to round off this list. Next up is the Hand of Malenia. This is arguably the hardest weapon in the game to obtain, as you do need to defeat Malenia and then trade in her remembrance to Enya at the Round Table Hold to obtain her blade. However, it is worth it. The damage output is off the charts. It has very high inherent blood loss buildup, and one of the best, definitely one of the coolest Ashes of War in the entire game, allowing you to use the waterfowl dance yourself. It does have ridiculously high stat requirements, with requiring a base of 48 dexterity. But by this point in the game, if you've beaten Malenia, you have the stats to put into it, and if you're going for a dexterity build, at least give this a go. It is so incredibly cool, and if nothing else, you need this just so you can roleplay as Malenia at least for a bit. After hearing her tell you that she is indeed Malenia, Blade of Mikola, for the 10,000th time, it's just nice to be able to use this horrible attack against others and feel some relief and comfort in it. This is an awesome katana, amazing damage, very cool attack, definitely one you want to grab and add to your arsenal. And finally, a dexterity build would be incomplete without a very solid ranged option, so I give you the black bow. Every single other bow in the game pales in comparison to this weapon. It has the barrage skill, and maxed out, it also has ridiculous amounts of damage. You can effectively use the barrage skill whilst dealing the same amount of damage as regular shots from other bows, but you're firing them twice as fast. Combine that with any kind of status effect arrows, you can put people to sleep, poison them, set them on fire, you name it, in an instant. The only drawback is you're gonna need a lot of arrows, because you're gonna go through a lot of arrows. And it does have the same quirky ability that the short bow does as well, allowing you to jump and shoot, and then shoot again immediately upon landing, getting in a very quick double shot. As you can see during this footage, it is absolutely melting some of the most powerful enemies in the game. And I should have mentioned this way earlier in the video, that this is on New Game Plus 3. So most enemies are really powerful compared to what they should be, and it's just melting them. There are arguments for a few other bows being good, but honestly, as soon as you can get hold of this, do. And talking of getting hold of it, it is found on a corpse on a rooftop in Lanedale Royal Capital, in the area northeast of the Avenue Balcony Site of Grace. I actually missed it during my first playthrough and had to go back and grab it just for the video, and oh, I'm so glad I did. Fell in love with it, and I've been using it ever since, and I suggest you do too. As you'll have seen from the footage, my personal preference is using it with sleep arrows. I'm literally able to just juggle enemies to sleep. It's stupid. It just feels so broken. Anyway, that is it for the top 10 dexterity weapons that I truly believe you should grab as soon as you can. You will not regret it. And as always, my friends, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.